Okay, so I'm finally back and ready to record a video for my main channel again. For those who don't already know, my channel received a strike earlier in the month for graphic, violent content because I released a 2-minute video showing a lot of the police brutality and exploitation that had been happening over the week, and in order to make sure that I had context going forward for why I was doing the fundraisers that I was doing. Oh, speaking of those, we almost earned $3,000. The largest chunk of that went to Atlanta protesters, and the next chunk of that is going to be going to Seattle protesters. I figure right now, those are two places that have become media hot zones, and one of them just happens to be my backyard. During all of this raucous cacophony, there has been a video that has been sent to me by multiple people, and it contains none other than everybody's favorite totally not a statist apologist, Candace Owens. Now, granted, this is the same Candace Owens that opposes any form of welfare, even though she has a family who uses it, rejects the scientific consensus on climate change, opposes a woman's right to abortion, and pulls the identity politic race card of it being used as a tool for exterminating black babies specifically, apparently. She also says that the Me Too movement is stupid and that she hates it, citing that apparently it's premised on the idea that women are stupid, weak, and inconsequential, which I have no idea where she even got that idea from. Basically, this woman apparently really knows the taste of leather. And I recognize that I'm basically poisoning a well here. All I'm saying is that this is the same woman who said that the Ku Klux Klan isn't a big problem even though they support Trump because Antifa exists. And after the Unite the Right rally said that concern over rising white nationalism was stupid, which is not something that the FBI says, but considering her unwavering devotion to Donnie Trump, I'm not 100% certain I can stand behind her ability to assess any national threat. Then again, by her own admission, she was influenced by the wonderful works of Ann Coulter, Milo Yiannopoulos, Ben Carson, and Thomas Sowell. The latter she will reference again in this video. But at this point, I think I've been saying too much. I don't think I've ever actually had a 2-minute long intro before the actual intro plays. So let's play that, and then get into the meat of the video. Alrighty, so I'm not going to worry about the fan art section right now. I'd really rather just get into the video after the long intro. In an ideal world, everything goes back to normal when the next video comes out. So let's take a look at Candace Owens' video.
Hello, Facebook family. I have decided to do this video. It has been weighing very heavily on my heart.
I'm sure it has. I'm not going to say anything about how sincere you may or may not be. That feels like that would be incredibly disingenuous. So let's hear the issue that's been weighing on your heart.
And on my mind as well, and it was something that I wanted to say early on, but there were so many emotions and so much pressure for me to go with the popular opinion about who George Floyd was, and sometimes it can be difficult when there are just so many external pressures to say what you believe, and this was an instance where I felt like my silence would have been better in the beginning, but the more that I think about it, I realize that we are being sold a lot of lies, and at the detriment to the black community, at the detriment to the white community, and at the detriment to America as a whole.
I love the distinction language there. I think if I'm given the benefit of the doubt, that's very much based on a slip-up, but it is still kind of weird to have that divide between the white and black community. And then again, she does bring this up later, so
I want to come out and say that I do not support George Floyd and the media depiction of him as a martyr for Black America. I'm going to explain why, and I hope that some of you guys will understand where I'm coming from. I have spent a considerable amount of time reading a lot of Black authors that I think are some of the most brilliant Black Americans breathing. Walter Williams.
That's an interesting one. Let's go ahead and take a look at that one before you list off the others. Beginning with Walter E. Williams, he believes that laissez-faire capitalism is the most moral and productive system that humans have ever devised. You know, that incredibly moral system that doesn't pay people a living wage, does its best to privatize things like healthcare, which literally does nothing but negatively affect homes and families, literally concluded that the Confederacy should have been perfectly A-okay, and that the Union's victory over the Confederacy made them run amok over states' individuals' rights. This was an African-American man. I'm sorry, Walter, you seem very educated, but let me go ahead and explain this as a random whitey on the internet. Do you understand that the states' rights that the Confederacy was aiming for were states' rights to own people? No wonder you're perfectly fine with the exploitation under laissez-faire capitalism. Okay, that's not a great place to get some information from. What other authors does Candace think are incredibly influential and some of the best of the best?
Shelby Steele.
All right, Shelby Steele. Let's take a look at him. Oh boy, he was the guy who authored A Bound Man, Why We're Excited About Obama and Why He Can't Win. A book he authored in 2007 where he tried to argue that Obama had to have his black identity because that's the only identity he was able to be bound to, which is technically correct. Society as a whole doesn't really view a mixed child as mixed. They end up viewing them as black no matter what the parentage was. But when Obama ended up winning the presidency, Steele ends up defending the content of his book, saying, oh, well, the subtitle was just a marketing device that his publisher and him came up with in about 30 seconds, so it doesn't really matter. Granted, while he is a conservative author and columnist, he doesn't seem to be anywhere near as bad as Walter. Though if there's any more on Shelby Steele that I should know, I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comment section.
Thomas Sowell.
Okay, you got one iffy, and then you got one horrible. What does Thomas Sowell have to say? Well, I guess we should look at what Hampton University economist Bernadette Schacher, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, and what Harvard University sociologist William Julius Wilson had to say about him. And there's more people than that have been critical of his work, but apparently he has an issue with lacking citations in many of his works, failing to explain a 70% difference between the earnings of whites and non-whites in one of his articles, failure to accurately take into account discrimination against women at work, he has poor methodology, and downplays racism while characterizing and then attacking liberal theories. Please note that with all these authors, I'm not doing an incredibly thorough investigation into everything they've ever done. I don't have that kind of time for a single video response on the internet. However, if you guys have any works from them that I should be reading, I would gladly take the reading suggestion.
And I recently came across something that was an idea that was planted into my head by Shelby Steele, and it has been something that I cannot forget. It is something that will stick with me for the rest of my life. And it is something that I hope for the Black Americans that are watching will stick with you for the rest of your life. Shelby Steele said that the Black community is unique from other communities. Our culture is unique from other communities because we are the only community that caters to the bottom denominator of our society. Now, let me explain what that means. It means to say that not every Black American is a criminal, not every Black American is committing crimes, but we are unique in that we are the only people that fight and scream and demand support and justice for the people in our community that are up to no good.
All right, so let me go ahead and lay this out very, very plainly. First of all, somebody being a criminal and somebody being up to no good are two completely different things. Good is a moral distinction. Something can be good or bad, irregardless of whether or not it is legal or illegal. Criminality has to deal with the legality of an action. Most people have a tendency to conflate the two, where they see criminals as bad and law-abiding citizens as good, ignoring law-abiding citizens that use legal loopholes to exploit and hurt other people in their own societies, and of course ignoring criminals who are guilty of such acts as stealing food from a local Walmart to feed their family because their employer cut their hours in half that week. Now, I'm not trying to say all criminals are good and all law-abiding citizens are bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that this position that I see quite often lacks a crap ton of nuance.
You would be hard-pressed to find, a Jewish person who has spent 5 stints in prison, who commits a crime and dies while committing a crime, and that the Jewish people champion and demand justice for.
That's a very specific description there. You couldn't possibly be talking about the different stints that George Floyd ended up serving in prison, and then the process of engaging in a crime couldn't possibly be a reference to the fact that he had a counterfeit $20 bill. I don't know if you're pulling something out of thin air, or if you're specifically trying to use a Jewish George Floyd as your hypothetical, but I'll continue with your video with that noted.
You will be hard-pressed to find this in white America. You'll be hard-pressed to find this even in Latino America.
Funny that, white and Latino America right now seem to be largely rallying behind George Floyd. I'm not hard-pressed to find an example of this. We have it in the streets. right now. But it's strange to me that Shelby Steele, as a sociologist, or at least as somebody with a master's in sociology, fails to understand a possible reason why this might be. Let's take a look at crime as it can possibly exist to a disenfranchised population. If you have a thoroughly disenfranchised population, crime might not be seen as an overt negative, it might be seen as a means to actually feed your family, a potential gateway out of poverty. Let's say that you have been working for 10 years at the same job trying to climb your way up the corporate ladder, but you're effectively earning like $12 an hour, even though you're in a managerial position and you've been promoted more than once. You shouldn't just start over at another company. Most people tell you that that would be bad, and you would be losing things like your 401k potentially. So you stick it out, but your family is still struggling, and because you're financially struggling, everybody in your family is putting even more pressure on you because they can't get good and healthy food, healthcare, and all of the other fun stuff that comes with being, impoverished. In situations like this, people will turn to crime. This is not the only time people turn to crime, mind you, but if the only thing you've been able to effectively afford for your family of, say, 5 or 6 has been hot dogs and ramen for the better part of several years, eventually that pressure is going to mount up and you're going to want to try to get them something better. This can manifest in finding a drug cartel that wants you to run something for them. This can also manifest in simply engaging in petty theft at a Walmart. But the fact of the matter is, sometimes crime is seen as a way out of these negative circumstances that seem impossible. Now, let's say you have a thoroughly disenfranchised community like the Black community has been over time. In many cases, these might seem like, while not the best option available, one of the only ones available. Now, let's take a group that has these pressures on them already and give them a historical problem with the police. Things such as their local precincts beginning as slave chasers. Things such as not being properly represented as a voter base, thus increasing pressures with the local law enforcement, who are the political arm of the people that you don't have the ability to vote for effectively. Now we have reason for them to resent the police officers to begin with, and a possible predisposition to crime as a method of escaping poverty. Again, not all situations are like this. I don't want to have some galaxy-brained moron in the comments going, yeah, I'm pretty sure that X person here wanted to just protect their family when they went out and killed a white guy on the street. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about a cultural and sociological issue of certain societal and systemic pressures that exist and can be seen. What kind of a culture would you expect to grow from a set of the citizenry who have these pressures and this history? Well, you would probably expect there to be more of a criminal element, possibly, and more of a disdain for police. Now, if we compound that with the issue of racial profiling, where Black people who do not belong to the criminal element are still having to engage with police officers as if they are the criminal element, what kind of a boiling pot scenario do you think would eventually come of this? Potentially a scenario where any wrongdoings of another human being were overlooked because his death is completely and totally unjustified by the brutal police officers who engaged in his execution? That is the situation we would expect. The situation that Shelby describes as strange and unique to the Black community isn't strange at all. It's the situation we would expect wholeheartedly, based on the history of people of color in the United States.
If there is a person that is spent multiple times in prison, you are not going to see a bunch of Latinos coming out demanding justice for this person, even if, and I want to be very clear, what I'm saying is not any defense for Derek Chauvin. I hope Derek Chauvin gets the justice that he deserves to be implemented upon him, and that the family of George Floyd deserves justice for the way that he died. But I also am not going to accept the narrative that this is the best the Black community has to offer.
So, couple things here. First of all, who is saying that George Floyd is the best the Black community has to offer? Even Martin Luther King was not the best the Black community had to offer. No one person is the best their community has to offer. Secondly, given that offering in George Floyd's case was getting killed by the police, are you suggesting there's another, more upstanding Black person who should be killed by the police and treated as a martyr instead? Do you potentially have a candidate for who should be killed by the police and treated as a martyr in George Floyd's stead? Is there someone you would potentially like to point us to who should be dead instead? Is it any of the people who have been lynched across America? Should they be the new faces of any potential cultural revolution? Or is there somebody alive who has enough thorough accomplishments that you think that they would be the ones worth putting on the chopping block? I hate digging into this point as much as I am, but I just want to say that that's a really yikesy take. I've not heard anybody say George Floyd is one of the best the black community has to offer. That sounds like a straw man, and the way you articulated the statement sounds like you're looking for a different virgin sacrifice.
For whatever reason, it has become fashionable over the last 5 or 6 years for us to turn criminals into heroes overnight.
Would you like to know another criminal who was a hero? Just another really important one. Martin Luther King. Do you know how many stints in jail that guy served? This is because, again, somebody being a criminal is a legal category, and somebody being a hero is what we would call a moral category, or at least an incredibly subjective moral category. But remember that one of the people who you stan, Donald Trump, literally got fined for turning black people away from his hotel.
And it is something that I find to be despicable, and it is something that I refuse to stand by any longer, and I am not going to play a part in it, no matter how much pressure comes from black liberals and black conservatives as some token of people wanting you to believe that this is the only way you can be black, is you have to say this was wrong and that this person was amazing. I won't do that. George Floyd was not an amazing person.
So, couple of things, just real quick. First of all, nobody is saying that you have to support George Floyd in order to be black. Not everybody out there is, you ain't black, Joe Biden. Secondly, where is this really strange, honestly, idea that it's a good idea to piss on the dead? See, let me go ahead and explain what happens with your video. Right. Let's pretend that you actually had a conscience and had a heart. George Floyd was a man who did not have a high measure of influence outside of potentially his home and maybe his local surroundings. So your video shows up in the Facebook feed of his daughter. You know, his daughter who actually was riding on her uncle's shoulders going, "Daddy changed the world." Imagine what it's like to be that person and then seeing you on the internet basically going, "No, he was not a good person. He was a horrible person." And again, before the galaxy brain person in the audience tries to say that's an appeal to emotion, Suris, an appeal to emotion is only a fallacy if I am arguing that the emotions make it right. I am not right because what Candace is doing is a shitty thing emotionally for a little girl. I simply want to point out that this is in fact a shitty thing to do to a now fatherless child, which, might I remind you, should have been a thing that you cared about in the first place, since that particular issue disproportionately affects black people in the United States as well. But I guess it's more fashionable to piss on graves.
And as soon as this video hit the internet, I did just basic searches. Everyone jumped on it and was looking at the police officer, and everyone agrees that the police officer was wrong, and the police officer has been arrested. So that is not the reason I'm not discussing that, is because that is not something that has been misconstrued in the media. He has been turned into the devil that he is, and there is no reason for us to harp on that any longer, because white Americans are not uplifting Derek Chauvin as a victim or pretending that he's an amazing human being. But George Floyd is being uplifted as an amazing human being. For those of you who have not yet seen the clips and did not pursue or wait for more clips to come out, first and foremost, George Floyd at the time of his arrest was high on fentanyl and he was high on methamphetamine. This came back in both of his autopsy reports. If you pursue the 911 transcript, you can see the person describing somebody who is out of their mind high, and which is what made the person fearful, because he tried to use a bill that I guess was a fake bill to purchase something, and then he was outside acting weird, and they, in their police call, said that this person was obviously distorted on drugs. When he is put into handcuffs and is put against the wall, a baggie of what looks to be like cocaine or it's a white baggie that he drops onto the floor that you can see in an image. If you look up the clip, the media is refusing to circulate it. You can find it on Twitter if you use DuckDuckGo and look up George Floyd baggie.
Okay, so let me go ahead and lay some stuff out here. First of all, you mentioned earlier in the video that nobody is misconstruing what Derek Chauvin did, and nobody is getting it wrong and saying that he didn't actually execute George Floyd. Actually, no, people have been saying that, in fact. In fact, in looking up your baggy footage, I found hundreds of comments from people who are saying exactly that. So don't pretend that nobody's doing it. There are people who are saying, and this is a pretty large amount, that George Floyd didn't die by having a knee to his neck, that he died because of a lethal drug overdose. However, none of that matters, and here's why. Because the drug toxicity had no bearing on George Floyd's cause of death. For the same reason that if I am on blood thinners and somebody slices my stomach open, and I bleed out when the wound might have otherwise dried and closed up, it is not suddenly the blood thinner's fault that I died. It is still the fault of the person who sliced open my stomach. Now, I know that's not your point, but that's a point I've been saying a lot when I looked up the footage that you told me to look up. Secondly, I don't think there's actually a problem, personally, with people owning substances. My reasoning for this is, one, if somebody wants to destroy their own body, that is their business. I don't think it's a good thing, but at the end of the day, that is, in fact, their business. What these people need is help. Help controlling their lives in a way that does not involve relying on substances. However, we as a society happen to have this really bad habit of painting substance abuse as some sort of moral failing. We've been doing this for a long time, and it certainly got even worse after 1971 when Nixon declared his war on drugs. A war that, by the way, was incredibly racially motivated. I mean, to quote his campaign manager, they wanted to have a war against minorities, but they couldn't legally do that. But if they could successfully attach marijuana to Mexicans and crack cocaine to black people, then they could effectively have the war on minorities they wanted under a drug war facade. People have been using drugs as an excuse for things like executions for years in Minneapolis, citing things like superhuman strength when on certain substances, which many medical experts have examined and said that it's junk science that's often used as a convenient excuse to justify excessive use of police force. You and I do not know the reasons why George Floyd had those substances. You and I also could probably agree that there was no reason for Derek Chauvin to attack the way he did. And I would hope you and I could agree that substance abuse is not a moral failing of some kind. The only argument I can find that substance abuse is a moral failing is if you start attaching other things like parental responsibility being ignored because of drugs, in which case the moral failing isn't the substance abuse. The substance abuse was a tool, much like how gun isn't a moral failing, but murder can be considered a moral failing even when the tool is gun. Hopefully putting it in those terms will make it understandable to the conservative portion of my audience.
You can watch the clip yourself with your own eyes. He had drugs on him at the time of his arrest. Now, barring all of that, nobody thinks that he should have died during this arrest, but what I find despicable to be is that everyone is pretending that this man lived a heroic lifestyle when he didn't, and I want to talk about what his lifestyle was leading up to this moment and why I refuse to accept the narrative that this person is a martyr or should be lifted up in the black community and that we should be buying t-shirts with his name on it.
So this probably comes as no surprise, but you seem to have no idea what a symbol is. Let me explain it very, very clearly. People generally will strip the humanity away from another human being in order to turn them into a symbol. Take a look at Donald Trump. Regardless of his history of sexualizing young women, sometimes below the age of 18, allegedly, regardless of having a history of strategic failure with multiple businesses, and regardless of the fact that he engages in pseudo-fascist rhetoric at all times, people still wear MAGA hats and Trump t-shirts as symbolic representations of what they feel Trump represents. Now, you and I can disagree on that, but the same thing has happened to George Floyd. A George Floyd t-shirt is not a celebration of everything he ever did in his life, good, bad, or otherwise. Just like a Martin Luther King t-shirt is not a celebration of every good or bad thing he did at every stage of his life or otherwise. It is a symbol, and these symbols usually embody the most positive, subjective traits of whatever we are symbolizing. For Trump, it can vary on the individual. There are some people who are legitimate fascists who pick up Trump merchandise because they want that symbolic fascism. There are people who are working class citizens who see Trump as some kind of savior because he was a worker like them. Apparently. And regardless of the fact that there is FBI footage that shows that Martin Luther King may not have been the squeaky clean, unscrupulous character that a lot of people want to paint him out to be, a Martin Luther King t-shirt is still going to be a symbolic representation of a civil rights movement. In much the same way, a George Floyd t-shirt is not a celebration of everything he's done in his life. It's a celebration of a potential revolution against police brutality, especially as it pertains to minority communities. As a Donald Trump fan, I would hope you understand that.
Okay, so here we have, first and foremost, let's start from the bottom of his record. And by the way, I am not saying that if you have a record, you don't deserve a second chance. I think people get arrested, and some people can serve time in prison, and I believe in second chances, but I do draw the line when it comes to second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth chances. 1998, he spent 10 months in prison for theft with a firearm. That was the first prison stint that I could find on him. In 2002, he spent 8 months in prison for a cocaine offense. In 2004, just 2 years later, he spent another 10 months in prison for a cocaine offense. In 2005, he spent another 10 months in prison for having less than 1 gram of cocaine on him again. In 2007, and this was the biggest instant that I had that made me realize this was a horrible human being that I am not going to pretend was a good person. In 2005, a woman who was pregnant received a knock at the door, and she went to the door, and the person pretended to be someone that worked for the water department. So she opened her door and quickly realized that the person at her door did not work for the water department and attempted to slam it. At the moment that she was attempting to slam it, a Ford pulled up and another 5 men jumped out of the car, and one of which was George Floyd, came up to the door, and they forced their way inside to her home, inside of her home. Mind you, this woman is pregnant. At that point, George Floyd took out a gun and pressed it to her stomach. She was screaming, begging for her life, and he put her inside of her living room and instructed one of his criminal friends that was with him to watch her and to make sure she didn't leave the living room. So he was playing guard while they ransacked her home looking for drugs and money. They did not find drugs. They ended up taking, I believe, her wallet and her cell phone. Fortunately for her, her neighbor observed what was going on and caught the license plate of the people as they pulled off and called 911. And when 911 was able to, they were able to track down the car of which George Floyd was the driver, and they arrested him. And 2 years later, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for that instance. Now, you can say the media is portraying it like he was just getting his life together after, being released in 2014 following that incident. He was just getting his life together and moved and was going to start afresh. I'd like to believe all of those things, and there's a gap, and he never got in trouble for 5 years until this incident when the police were called on him again. But you are defying common sense to believe that this person suddenly became an exemplary character but happened to be high on fentanyl and methamphetamine and trying to use a bill, a fake bill, to purchase something.
All right, I let you go on for quite a while. Now, let's explain this entire situation. First of all, the situation that you are laying out right now with George Floyd impersonating a water company employee is wrong. This is something that can be considered a moral failing, a robbery of another citizen. This is a bad thing, and there is no sugarcoating it. But let me go ahead and talk about what I mentioned before. Drugs are not a moral failing. It is the things attached to those drugs, and drugs are a tool. Secondly, to pretend that you would never accidentally, because you don't know the context, use a fake bill to pay for something is laughable. Let me explain. I worked for several years in a gas station. I moved myself up into management, which meant I had to deal with fake bills constantly. In fact, the only write-up I ever got during my time at that store was for accidentally accepting a $100 bill that was fake because our security system was down and I didn't have a proper way to check it. Those little markers don't work all the time with some of the more recent counterfeits. However, Brink's safes can actually digitally detect if a bill is counterfeit. We were encouraged to run any bill above a $10 bill through the Brink safe whenever we accept it to make certain that it was not a counterfeit bill. Those systems go down for 3 hours during the overnight shift, so here we are. But just on the overnight shift, where I only received about 150 to 200 customers a night, maybe, I would receive 1 to 2 counterfeit bills every single day. If we accept the fact that my store alone served about 1,600 people during the day shift, we can easily extrapolate from there that there would have been several more cases of potential counterfeit bills in the daytime, and this is an everyday occurrence. Did each and every one of those persons happen to be a criminal mastermind with an intent to undermine the system with counterfeit currency? No. I'm going to go ahead and give George Floyd, in this scenario, the benefit of the doubt, much like I would every one of those customers, that they had no idea they had a fake 20. Most people who have fake bills have no idea they have a fake 20. In fact, it isn't until you get to the $100 bills, and only the recent ones, where there are any clear identifiers on them that can make you 100% certain that they are not a very good counterfeit. And even then, the watermark strips on $100 bills can also be emulated. So, if we're being honest, robbing another United States citizen? Moral failing. Having drugs in his system? Not a moral failing. Using a counterfeit bill? Not a moral failing. But people like you have a tendency to frame anything like this as if it is a moral failing. This is a concept that Ocean Keltoy covers very well on his channel, and it's called latent Christianity. Now, I recognize for a lot of the conservative right, this isn't a latent thing, they just are, but the fact of the matter is, this idea of moralizing every action, even when an action is completely amoral, that is, outside of that scope, is a very Christian thing to do. It also can end up being a very abusive thing to do because it ascribes intent to every action, even when an action was not meant to be bad or good. It's like if somebody accidentally runs into you in a parking lot, not with a car, but just they hit you with their cart. And you freak out about how that was intentional and they must have been trying to hurt you or scrape your car or anything like that, ignoring other possible explanations like maybe this person is partially blind, maybe they were distracted, maybe their child ran off somewhere and they were looking at the child and not your car and you were the one who happened to be backing up into them? All kinds of possible explanations that exist completely outside the scope of good or bad, or moral or immoral.
And so, in my opinion, George Floyd was a criminal. He was a criminal. And just because he was a criminal doesn't mean he deserved to die at the knee of a police officer. But it does mean that I am not going to play a part of the broken black culture that always wants to martyr criminals, who wants to pretend they were these upstanding human beings that just wanted to help society, that just wanted to reach out and uplift society. And he has a rap sheet that is long, that is dangerous. He was an example of a violent criminal his entire life.
His entire life, you say? But you said for the last 5 years he didn't have any issues whatsoever. Also, you mentioned his rap sheet being incredibly long, but let's look at the context of some of the ways that he actually got arrested. He was a star football and basketball player for Jake Yates High School and later played basketball for 2 years at a Florida community college. In 1995, he spent 1 year at Texas A&M University in Kingsville before returning to his mother's apartment in an incredibly low-income neighborhood to try to find local jobs in construction and security. This is important context because this would be 18 to 20 years where, again, he wasn't a violent criminal, as Candace Owens is trying to argue. So that's at least 25 years total where he wasn't. Certainly not his entire life, but you know, what's nuanced to people like Candace? His first arrest occurred in August 2nd of 1997. This would be when he was 23 years old. So, sorry, not 25 years of no problems, 28. According to prosecutors, police caught him delivering less than 1 gram of cocaine to someone else and sentenced him to about 6 months in jail. The following year, they arrested and charged Floyd again with theft on 2 separate occasions, sentencing him to 10 months and 10 days in jail. On August 29th, 2001, 3 years later, he was sentenced to 15 days in jail for failure to identify himself to a police officer. He didn't give his name, address, or birthday to a cop who was arresting him for reasons that were unknown, because the court records don't say why the police were questioning him in the first place. That's not a violent offense. That was literally not wanting to identify to a police officer, and if the court doesn't have information on why he was getting arrested, I think we can thoroughly dismiss that as well. Now we go on to 2002. On October 29th, 2002, he gets arrested for having less than 1 gram of cocaine on him. Again, it's a drug charge, and drug charges in Candace's eyes are complete and total moral failings. I need to remind everybody that caffeine and alcohol are both also drugs, and that sugar is a more addictive substance than cocaine. That's not saying cocaine's not dangerous, I'm just trying to give a little bit of perspective. On January 3rd, 2003, he gets arrested for criminal trespassing, which I don't know the context of, but I do happen to know a lot of Pokemon Go players who've criminally trespassed. I guess they all have violent rap sheets too, right, Candace? He intended on giving less than 1 gram of cocaine to someone else. That was on February 6th of 2004. And then having less than 1 gram of cocaine in his possession on December 15th, 2005. He was sentenced to a grand total of 30 months in jail for those crimes. However, most of that seems to be incredibly petty stuff. So based on that, it looks like the only crime that he's committed that I actually care about that much in this long and violent rap sheet is the 2007 incident, which he pleaded guilty for and served 5 years for. So again, like I said earlier in the video, that is one that I am perfectly fine condemning him for. Everything else, honestly, I'm beginning to think who the fuck cares. The only one that I honestly care about out of all of those, above and beyond the one that I mentioned, is potentially the trespassing one, but I would need context for that. I didn't find any of that actual context in my research, so if you guys have some of that, please send it to me in the comments. That would be great. So let's go ahead and look at the drugs that he had in his system at time of death. The fentanyl specifically. Now, Candace, you seem to view drugs as a moral failing, but did you know that the fentanyl he had in his system was a synthetic opioid pain reliever? The methamphetamines he was under, we have no idea what method the intoxicants even got into his bloodstream, or for what reasons. So again, context matters, and again, I don't view taking drugs as a moral failing. I take ibuprofen for pain. I know people who take marijuana for PTSD. Additionally, the presence of fentanyl above the 0.20 margin, which is significantly less than the amount that was found in Floyd's bloodstream, is generally a strong indicator that a patient used fentanyl in the past. And for the methamphetamine, while we don't have exact context, the amphetamines that were found in George Floyd's system were within the range of patients that use that for therapeutic or prescription needs. Huh. You remember when I mentioned ibuprofen for my pain? Apparently it looks like most of this was being used, potentially, for that reason. While Candace is trying to paint this person as an incredibly violent drug addict, it's looking like his history doesn't necessarily show that in the clearest of terms. What a weird day to be Candace Owens. 6 million views and you're that fucking wrong. Hennepin County medical examiner stated that Floyd's blood levels make it seem like he had recently used meth in the past, but that he wasn't peaking on a high from it, and county investigators did not list drugs as his actual cause of death. For these reasons, considering the amount that was detected in his toxicology report, it's a bit of an exaggeration. In fact, it's a lot of an exaggeration to claim that he was high on these things at the time. You testing positively for the drug does not mean that you were high off bunkers when being choked. But why would Candace be drawing such attention to the criminal history of George Floyd when, again, only 1 and maybe 2 of these things even fucking matter? Well, it fits into what many psychologists call the just world hypothesis, which is a cognitive bias where people believe that the world is just and orderly, and people get what they deserve. It's incredibly difficult for people to believe that bad things can happen to good people, or to people who don't justly deserve it. This is because if people know that these things do happen, they have to decide whether they want to do something about it, or sit by silently knowing that there is injustice happening around them. And honestly, based on what I've seen from Candace, I'm willing to assume that she's perfectly fine with the injustice happening around her. I know earlier in the video she said she wants justice for George Floyd and justice against Derek, but I'm talking about the systemic injustice around you. I know a lot of people who deny that stuff like this happens, or they'll push the narrative away and say that, well, the issue isn't racial problems, it's police brutality. But the issue can be police brutality, and it manifests as racial problems, meaning that we have a twofold issue, not a one-fold issue. I know some people might have an issue with Snopes specifically, but they provided an incredibly thorough investigation into George Floyd's criminal record and the record of drugs in his system, and the exact quote that I pulled about the Just World hypothesis is also in their article, so I will be linking that in the description below. Now, there is a lot more in Candace's video, and I will be linking a copy of it in the description as I usually do, but I only want to get into one more point before we wrap things up.
okay? Up until the very last moment. Now, again, I want to be clear. This is not a defense for Derek Chauvin. No one that I have spoken to, no one in the news is defending Derek Chauvin. He is getting what he has coming to him. Okay, great. But why are we pretending that this criminal should be upheld as a citizen, as a martyr in Black America? A martyr for a fake narrative, by the way. Police brutality, racially motivated police brutality is a myth, okay? So let's get into that. Not only are we using this death, right, and allowing it to cause these riots and protests, pretending this was some upstanding citizen in the Black community who was tackled down and killed for no reason, right? Not only are we allowing it to inspire riots in which Black people are dying, in which actual upstanding Black citizens are dying. Case in point, I'm sure you guys have all now seen David, the sheriff that just was shot and killed because he was trying to protect a pawn shop. Please look him up if you haven't seen it. I'm blanking on his last name. His first name is David, who was shot and killed for trying to protect a pawn shop from looters. An upstanding citizen, an actual head of a police. He was the head of a police his entire life, 77 years old, did everything right? So we now have to kill upstanding Black citizens because a non-upstanding Black citizen, a career Black criminal, died. Now, did he deserve to die in that manner? No. I can't say it enough. No, he didn't deserve to die in that manner. But I will be damned if the rest of us upstanding Black citizens have to suffer because of this incident that rarely ever happens in America. So here are some numbers for you people that are still believing that police brutality is a real, racially motivated police brutality is a real thing. First and foremost, okay, you have a 25% higher chance as a violent white criminal of dying at the hands of a police officer than you do as a Black criminal. Last year, a total of 9 unarmed black men were killed by police officers and 19 white men were killed by police officers. For those of you that aren't good at mathematics, right, you might be thinking, oh, but Candace, white people represent 60% of the population and Black people represent just 13% of the population. It doesn't matter what percentage of the population you represent. It matters what percentage of the violent criminal community you represent.
And there it is. So I made a point before in a tweet that I don't think Candace actually understands statistics, but now I understand that the issue is that she ignores them. I made a point way earlier in this video that because of the proximity to things like slavery, Jim Crow laws, etc., many people in minority and disadvantaged communities find crime to be an avenue to escape poverty. Does this make it good? No. But again, this is Candace engaging in the just world hypothesis. The world is fine. It's those ignorant Black people who have a problem. I've also seen dumb shits on my timeline. I'm looking at you, Mr. Brass. Yes, I'm calling you out. Try to make this exact same point that their savior, Candace Owens, has been saying. Let me make this perfectly clear. From a sociological perspective, crime would be expected more in minority communities, and on top of that, our reports on crime are the amount of crimes that are either reported or caught. That happens more in minority and Black communities because, and I went over this in my 1350 video that I'll be linking in the description below, if you over-police those areas, which historically happens, you will get those numbers no matter what. No, Candace, it does in fact matter that there is less of the population that is Black than is white. That does matter because criminality is not some moral failing in and of its own. Context matters, and criminality is not some internalized thing that a subset of the population just has in their hearts that makes it okay for the police to kill them. The fact of the matter is, you are 3 times more likely in all cases to be killed by the police if you are Black than if you are white in the United States during any given arrest. This is based on an extrapolation of the actual homicide data where police are concerned. As opposed to explaining that data, you just say, it's just the bad ones, it's just the criminals. But that doesn't actually check out, because we have cases like Breonna Taylor, where somebody who was not engaged at all gets killed in their sleep during a no-knock raid, where police had no business being in the house that was 10 miles away from the actual hit they were supposed to be going for, and were showing up in civilian clothing, and then of course, as if they were regular burglars, they got shot at, and then Breonna Taylor got killed in their sleep. You sweeping, well-understood sociological and statistical realities under the rug does not suddenly make them go away. You don't live in a just world, Candace. You live in a figment of your own imagination. You pretend everything around you is hunky-dory and a-okay, and the bad things only happen to the bad people, and the good things only happen to the good people, and then you bring up an example of someone you consider a good person who the bad thing happened to when they were being your idea of an upstanding hero. It is cognitive dissonance. That thing you're engaging in right now is hyper-cognitive dissonance. You believe you live in a just world, yet you can cite so many examples of an unjust world that you happen to live in. I'm sorry, but the situation that we are living in right now is not just. It's not right. But you're too busy licking the boots of people like fucking Trump to do anything about it. You're too busy pointing the finger at people like George Floyd for shit he did 13 years ago to justify your narrative now in the future. What kind of ignorant-ass stupidity do you have to cum guzzle to get to this stage in your life? The fact of the matter is, I don't know, and I wish I did. And the fact of the matter is, I'm mad, and I'm sorry for getting mad. But even as a white person, I grew up with all this shit. I grew up in Montclair and Pensacola. That's where people got their drugs when I was a kid. That was a majority black neighborhood. I grew up in this environment. And yet people like you don't seem to fucking understand that, and I don't know why. You don't understand what it's like to actually be disenfranchised, or you've been tokenized so much, you stopped caring because at least you've got it good. Unfortunately, other people don't have it good. And this is the reason why I've been raising money for bail funds, why I've been raising money to try to get protesters some kind of help. I hope 20 years from now, people are going to look back at this side of history and see that Candace is on the wrong side. And I hope 20 years from now, maybe even Candace will see that she's on the wrong side of history. But I'm beginning to go from realistic perspectives to incredibly pessimistic perspectives, because they seem like the realistic ones. And I hope that my anger and passion during a video like this is not misconstrued as frothy SJW nonsense. I am hoping that somebody understands that people like Candace are sweeping the issue under the rug and refusing to do anything about it. People like the protesters are going out and doing something about it. They're exercising their First Amendment, which technically Candace is too. So with that said, if you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you did, leave a like. This is one of those exhausting videos, and I want to stop doing videos on stuff like this. I want to go back to just looking at the claims of creationists and letting that be it. But I feel like my energy's better served here right now, and it's not what I wanted to do with my channel, but I guess it's what I'm doing. So thanks for viewing the video. Please don't enjoy the taste of leather too terribly much. It's sweaty and people have had their feet in those boots for a while. Links to Patreon and everything else will be at the end of the video, as well as in the description below. And as always, everyone, insert a video tagline here.